Welcome to Dynasty Life. I am Theo Gremminger. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. Today, I am joined by Alan Seslowsky, my guy, a podcast with Alan a million times. We actually have some stuff to talk about today that's relevant and just news dropping kind of every minute now, Alan. We have the start of training camp. It's the information age. We have every day kind of more information coming through on more teams than we're used to. Videos dropping. Beat reporters are more amplified. It's certainly like scaled up incredibly since you started doing fantasy football content.
Theo, you look like you're in the best shape of your life right now.
It's training camp. So I hit the gym before I was with you. So maybe I got, like a little pump for the listening audience. A pump means, I just hit the gym and I'm looking good, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, not to explain the joke, but that's obviously one of the most famous training camp cliches, right? Like one of the things that they say.
Jalen Reagor, best shape of his life.
Right, best shape of his life. And then the ones I still haven't really figured out is lost weight, right? Like that's another one of those training camp things where they say the players lost weight.
So I'll say the whole adage like 10 years ago, maybe if you heard a football player lost weight, you wouldn't have liked it. But there's been a lot of these guys that have actually improved. Like when I hear Puka Nacua lost 10 pounds, I love that. The guy's in the gym. The guy obviously thinks his body could go to another level. He was always sort of a thick wide receiver.
Yeah. Doughy. He was doughy.
Yeah, a little doughy. But then the flip side, you hear Devon Achane gain weight. You like that as well. So it's like player specific. And I feel like once these guys get past 35, they all just get like as skinny as possible. Past 30 even, these guys are like, forget about it. Like Travis Kelce right now looks like he hasn't picked up a weight all offseason. Like he's
pumping other things. He's pumping some other stuff, Travis Kelce.
Yeah, no,
he's getting the best training and workout of any of them. But hey, does the gain weight, loss weight, does it make a difference in a sense where position? Like you just talked about wide receiver. Do you want that maybe to gain weight? With running back, maybe gain weight so they have a little extra armor. You hear that Achane puts on weight. Does that slow him down? Does any of that stuff enter into your mind?
So with the track, I think you always have to add context. And I know like Evan Silva, who I respect a lot, throughout the years never likes hearing about a running back bulking up. Thinks it kind of like you could maybe sustain more hits, but maybe you lose a little bit of explosiveness. But with Devon Achane, like the guy was a track and field player, big time one, like all SEC level track and field star at Texas A&M. So like it was difficult for him to kind of maintain that weight at that sport. So now without doing the track and field now, for him, I think it's significant because we want him to play 190 plus. Last year, we had 3 running backs who were sub 200 pounds finish as RB1s last year. And if he can get to play consistently at like 190, 195 pounds, that would be like a big win for him. I think last year he was sub 190, and I think that scares the hell out of people. But James Cook had 230 carries last year. Kyron Williams had a ton of touches last year. Jahmyr Gibbs weighed less than 200. He was like 199 at the combine and had plenty of volume last year. So that doesn't scare me at all. But I got to have a little beef with you, Alan. So the other day Alan, if you're not paying attention to what Alan's putting out over at Rotowire and you play Dynasty, you're at a disservice because every week Alan puts out an awesome Dynasty podcast. And Alan, I still have the highest view count of any of your guests, correct?
I mean, the highest view count and also the most dislikes on the pod too. That people are smashing that dislike button. So you are the leader in overall controversy on the Rotowire podcast.
Infamous. That was a lot of fun. But the same day, I was like, I felt very like attacked. The same day, I had Sean Siegel of RotoViz on press coverage to do a complete zero RB show. And we went over an hour talking zero RB. Literally the same day, you drop a podcast with, who was your guest that day on Hero?
It was actually, I was a guest on Jeff Erickson's podcast on Rotowire. So I was the guest.
But the thumbnail reeked of an Alan Seslowsky influence.
Yeah, well, that's what I do for a living, right? I'm a full-time graphic designer and video editor over at Rotowire, now video manager. But it was definitely my thumbprint was on it.
You guys had literally, I have zero RB strategy, and Alan at the same time says, forget zero RB. This is the strategy you need. It was a hero RB show. So I felt incredibly attacked there. Tell us in the chats, are you looking to build with zero RB or hero RB this year, or running back? I think it's interesting.
There's a lot of paths to get to the championship. And I think that's, we're making the joke that we had contradicting, warring styles of strategies in our podcast on the same day. But I think it really just proves that there are a bunch of ways to get there, right? Like zero RB. Again, you had, for those who don't know Sean Siegel, he was the one who I would say most famously publicized and actually won with zero RB, where he literally didn't take a running back for the first 5 or 6 rounds. That's become a popular strategy. And then, the hero RB is kind of a modified version of that, as these workhorse running backs have. I mean, there was a time, Theo, when running backs were the first 20 of the first 24 picks in fantasy drafts. And now that there's only like 3 or 4 left. So it is a viable strategy because it's in scarcity. The year after Sean Siegel publicized zero running back, everyone tried to do it. And when your whole league is trying to do it, when 8 people in the league are going zero RB, it actually doesn't work.
Yeah, and you nailed it. And at the end of the day, and I think Sean would agree with this, I think Jeff Erickson would agree with this, that it's way more important to select the correct players than to try to any strategy can work if you select the right players. Literally any strategy can work if you hit the nail on the head on every one of your picks.
Right.
So
we're talking about optimizing strategy, though, right? Like, you never know if we only had the answers to the test before we took the test, that would be great. But when we're selecting a strategy, we're trying to go with like the best chances. And again, I remember the year that after Sean did the whole zero RB thing, like I was like, oh, I'm doing that next year. And in the NFFC, I was taking Eric Decker in like round 3, where he had like a round 6 ADP, because I was like, I need wide receivers. Like, this is how it's done. And then all of a sudden you have like the equivalent would be taking someone like Tyler Lockett in round 5 this year, where he goes in like round 9-ish or something like that, just to have a third wide receiver. So the hero RB thing works if none of the I like that you called it the God tier of wide receivers, or if those are depleted. If you don't think Garrett Wilson or Puka Nacua really can be that guy, and you might, that's fine. But then you go to one of the running backs that you think could be do you remember maybe 4 years ago, 6 years ago, that even just the first round, the first 10 picks were running backs like CJ Spiller, Jamal Charles, those type of guys. And what did the guy on the end do, Theo? He took Demaryius Thomas and Calvin Johnson, right? Like, you took 2 wide receivers. Those were the only 2 wide receivers that went in the first 15 picks. Yeah,
no, I think you nailed it. And also this year, when you talk about optimal strategy, sometimes it might be based on where you're selecting in the draft. Hero RB, you're able to pull off now. It sort of requires a top 6 pick, unless you're thinking of a modified hero RB where you're starting out with a running back in the 2nd or 3rd round, which is also viable. But we are talking NFL training camp. We're going to talk about some of the news. We're going to talk about a number of players that we think are going to rise up in value, both in Dynasty and certainly in redraft. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive right into it.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February, and dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest and bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. Theo Gremminger with Alan Seslowsky. Alan, let's just get after it. We see a number of reports come out. Some of them are fluff. Some of them are important. Just your process. What are you looking for, like multiple reports? Are you looking for a little bit of coach speak mixed in with some reporters? Are you looking for, or you try to like basically fade out a lot of the noise? How is your process like determining what's important versus this is a nothing thing.
Yeah, no, this is a cool like conversation piece because we've become pretty good at deciphering. There's little like indicators, flags that goes up, right? We just, made the joke about best shape of his life. We push that aside. That's usually encouragement. Cart coming out, right? We used to panic when the cart was coming out because Justin Jefferson, fell down. People would panic. They would sell. Dynasty trades would happen. People would basically start playing, having the funeral for that season. I think now we know that sometimes cart coming out can mean that they have to go to the bathroom, right? I mean, it's as benign as that. Like cart coming out, they bring out the cart in every situation. So I think those type of things. Now when we talk about coach speak, right? The positive stuff, I push aside. The negative stuff, I think, is something to pay attention to. And, we just saw some negative news directly from the coach's mouth about the Saints and Kendre Miller. That's something to pay attention to. If Kendre Miller was a popular sleeper in the 8th to 10th round, I think now you have to come off that and pick another guy, or else you're just taking on more risks than you thought you were.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think that, you bring up the fact that a lot of the coaches try to stay as positive with the media as possible. So when they do throw some guy under a bus, once in a while it's to motivate them. But a lot of times it's sort of like they're frustrated and they're done with this kind of guy. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the Kendre Miller situation soon, whether it's an Alvin Kamara, whether it's a Taysom Hill being part of the weekly game plan. That's also another factor. He is tight end eligible in a lot of leagues right now, Alan. But let's go ahead and start out with it. Jameson Williams, positive reports. We had a video where he gets behind the defense, looked good. Obviously, this is not a full-on scrimmage or anything like that, but Jameson Williams absolutely looked explosive, like we want Jameson Williams to look. And there was a report out of The Athletic about how he looks like a different player in training camp. Your thoughts on Jameson Williams, his impact this year, your interest level this year?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with a dynasty trade I was just offered. This is a real trade in a $300 dynasty league. So this is like real deal here. And then I'll get into, and it has to do with Jameson Williams. All right. I'm trying to get off TJ Hawkinson for obvious reasons. I won the league last year. So someone offered me Pat Freiermuth and Jameson Williams. I said no, right? Just to fast forward to the end here. Jameson Williams, it's people, and this is how you use that type of news to try to get good players in Dynasty. This is Dynasty life. Good news hits. You never know. Some people are like, oh, I don't believe that. I'm denying that trade like I did, right? But I still like the whole Jameson Williams thing. I think that it's important that he showed up in the playoffs on the biggest stage at the end of the year. Now, it didn't really translate to fantasy points. He had like a big 70-yard run, but you could see, the pedigree was there. And then when these players kind of fail in year 1 and year 1.5, they either go the Treylon Burks and Quentin Johnston way, or Quentin Johnston hasn't failed in year 2 yet, or they could, they can have revival, right? Like, I don't think Jameson Williams is going to ever be like this lock and load top 12 wide receiver that we're hoping like someone like Drake London is, Theo, but can he be Will Fuller, right? What I mean is you start him every week, you get a 30-point game, and then you get 3-4-point games in a row, but you cannot bench him because he gives you that one explosive week. So I like Jameson Williams. I don't think his price is going to change much until there's trust there. But man, in Dynasty, like if you wanted to get off him, now is the time.
So that's the one where I would love to hear some Dan Campbell coach speak this week to back up the media and say that, like, the Josh Reynolds role is going to all go to Jameson Williams. Because I think it's the pathway for him is a little bit easier than some people think. It's just absorbing the Josh Reynolds role with what he did last year. So if he can just do that with all the attention paid to guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and David Montgomery, then you're talking about get him 95 targets. That's all. We're not asking for more. I'd say 95 targets for him would be a massive win with his explosiveness in this offense. I mean, if he gets to 105, which would be him absorbing the Reynolds targets plus what he did last year with a couple of the manufactured runs, then he's kind of interesting. But I agree with you. I think he's going to be a spike week guy. It's never a guy that I'm going to be like, oh, amazing, I've got this amazing floor this week with Williams.
And by the way, when we say spike week guy, that doesn't just mean, quote, better in best ball, right? Like there's a couple different ways to play fantasy football. Like you can draft a wide receiver 3 for your team, like a guy that your third or fourth wide receiver that has this consistent like 7 for 60 sort of game. I'm trying to think of like who the guy, like Chris Godwin might be a guy that fits that bill. In the past, it was like Jarvis Landry, but actually he was really good. Jarvis Landry, he was like or you could draft the nuclear bomb that is volatile in your redraft, and you just take those 3 to 5 and 6 point games, knowing I said Will Fuller before. Peak Deshaun Jackson was kind of like that, even though he did have a little bit more consistency. So Jameson Williams is a player that in all formats that I would be trying to, he's a buy and a sell, right? Like, so because if you've just been holding him, like, and someone's offering you like Keon Coleman for him, like that's a real dynasty trade that could actually happen, right? Or if I'm trying to think of a running back in that range, if somebody needs a running back,
well, I think it's just based on his dynasty valuation, he would be a pathway for you getting like a dusty old running back that might be more like a 1-year guy,
like a Najee Harris type.
Yeah, or like an Aaron Jones.
Ooh, okay.
Somebody like that.
Okay, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, or is that a little too rich?
I think the Jacobs manager might want a little bit more than Jameson Williams, but if they're super scared and the depth of leagues and how many wide receivers you're starting, but I would think it would be more like in line with those.
Javonte Williams.
I might take the Jameson Williams side right now.
That's what I'm saying. Like that deal might get done because both of those managers hate their players and are willing to re-roll in the other position.
So let's talk about one where if I was doing this with you a week ago, I would have expected that I would have had when we reveal like the guys we think that are going to rise, I would have thought that I would have had Dalton Kincaid in there. And I still think this is kind of a non-story. So Joe Buscaglia, which is a guy who writes for The Athletic and is very respected as a voice for the Buffalo Bills, says the Bills won't commit to Dalton Kincaid as a full-time starter with Dawson Knox in the fold. And to me, this is the kind of thing where we know what Dawson Knox is. We know what Dalton Kincaid is. We know what the wide receiver situation in Buffalo is. We know about this incredible talent that Kincaid is in a first-round pick. And then they're telling me that it's like we're going to see a lot of Dawson Knox. Kincaid's going to get moved around the offense. They're going to be in 2 tight end sets a lot. And it's not just snap participation that gets you anything in fantasy football. It's routes run, it's targets. And Dalton Kincaid is going to boat race anything Dawson Knox can do this year. So you get one report saying that, and then you get another report saying Dalton Kincaid was the most impressive receiver for the Bills yesterday at training camp. So I feel like that's the kind of thing where if anybody in your league is worried about a guy who's being treated like a tight end 3 in redraft like Dawson Knox is, then that's maybe a buying window for you as a dynasty manager if anybody has any fear with Kincaid. Do you agree on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's go back to the 2023 draft, right? The Seahawks picked at 20. They took JSN. Miami got their pick skipped because of the Tom Brady, meddling issue. So then the next 3 picks were Quentin Johnson. At the time was a pretty, solid prospect. Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison. By all reports, the Bills were trying to trade up from 25 to get one of those receivers. When they failed, they're like, okay, let's just take the best pass catcher, regardless of position, and that was Dalton Kincaid. I don't think that the Bills viewed Dalton Kincaid as a wide receiver. They said, okay, he's a pass catcher that has the letters TE next to their name. And from a GM perspective, that's a little bit of a cheat code because it's cheaper to re-sign tight ends. It's cheaper to franchise tag them. So even though Dalton Kincaid is a tight end, they're probably seeing him as more of like a true hybrid, almost in the Travis Kelce-esque sort of way.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I think if we're trying to figure out if me and you had to rank the tight ends by how many targets we thought they would get this year, Kincaid's going to be in our top 5.
Top 5. I mean, he's probably
could be top 1.
Top 1. Yeah. I mean, Travis Kelce is going to be getting the Gronk treatment. I mean, we saw it a little bit last year where they use him and then they, pull him back. They have other weapons this year. And then they step on the gas in December with Travis Kelce. Right. So, yeah, I mean, Kincaid, I would take that. I wonder what it is. Like, if there's a way to make that bet. Like, who else? I mean, Trey McBride, he was getting, but now they add Marvin Harrison. And
even with Marvin Harrison, I like what the bar for what we saw last year with Ingram, what we saw with Kelsey in some season, like some of these guys, we don't always get the tight end one hitting that target ceiling. Like I feel like there's a chance when we start looking at like 140, 135 targets, McBride can get there even with Marvin Harrison Jr. It's just
it's a dark horse. Dark horse is Jake Ferguson. He could end up leading the NFL in tight ends and targets because, I mean, if Brandon Cooked is Brandon Cooked, right, then obviously CeeDee Lamb will get his. But can he really do another 170 this year or whatever the hell he had?
100%, right? I mean, 180.
Sure. But Jake Ferguson, now in the peak of his powers at age 25, is established. He's not catching anyone by surprise. Dak trusts him. I mean, you could see him get the Evan Ingram treatment this year, right? I mean, why not? If Brandon Cooks he's on that precipice of where wide receivers start to really see a serious decline.
Yeah, 100%. So let's keep this thing going. We saw the Nick Chubb squat video where he rose up in some best ball contests like 10 spots. Your thoughts on the Browns backfield right now and how you would approach it?
I've just been betting against Nick Chubb, right? Like
me too.
Yeah, and when I'm drafting Deontay Foreman, I'm drafting him for September, right? And redraft. Like I still can't believe that the sharper fantasy players in best ball aren't on Foreman. He was available in some like 30 deep like dynasty leagues, like for like a third or a fourth. Nobody wants Foreman, and all he's done is so. Jerome Ford is certainly a rock solid play there, but man. Am I missing something here? Is Foreman just like not? He seems to be a complete afterthought, and I'm thinking like he's a 14 touch player in the first 4 weeks of the season.
A very, very, very poor man's Nick Chubb, poverty Nick Chubb in terms of style. Jerome Ford still would be the one that I would like, but again, Jerome Ford costs you right now.
Right,
like you're paying like high-end RB4 prices.
And he can't be 25 touches a game for it. He could be 18, but doesn't that mean there's room for someone else to have 12 to 14?
Yeah, I think depending on the depth of your league and depending on your draft structure, we've talked about it all summer on a couple other pods, how the Jerome Ford and Deonta Foreman double tap in best ball or in redraft is like free right now. And all it takes is the Browns saying, you know what, Nick Chubb will be back week 6. And then Deonta Foreman and Ford both are going to gain ADP value. And for my dynasty teams, I have like one Nick Chubb team left, and it's a monster FFPC team. I have Jerome Ford on that team, but when there's the first waiver wire run, Deonta Foreman's just sitting there. I'm going to do what I can to add him to my roster. I'm not going to go nuts, but I'm going to do what I can to add him to my roster.
Let me ask you this. Who will have more touches in the first 4 weeks of the season? Is it Deontay Foreman or is it Zach Moss? Or is it like pretty close?
Pretty close. And you're a professional. Great segue. Chase Brown. We're getting positivity out of Chase Brown. This is one where the two of us were very positive on Chase Brown last year on the Sonic Truth podcast. The podfather, Matt Kelly, was very anti Chase Brown. This is one where Chase Brown is going to rise up in ADP. I'm convinced of it. And dynasty managers, it's an interesting one, Alan, because is this a sell high window for Chase Brown, or is he a, like, dare I say it, Tony Pollard-like talent where he was underrated as a rookie draft pick, now gets the opportunity to catch 50, 60 passes? Maybe I'll take it back a step. A Jalen Warren type year 2 with Chase Brown. Maybe Tony Pollard's a little too high of a bar to set. I'm not saying running back 1 Chase Brown, but I think realistically he can put up RB2 numbers.
Yeah, I mean, this is when you drafted him at the end of the second round of your rookie draft or somewhere in the middle of the third round. This is what you wanted. Like you were like, okay, it may not happen this year. Joe Mixon's there. I'm an injury away, but he separated himself for those two guys. I mean, Trevion Williams, like those guys that just won't die off that roster, right? And what's the other dude's name? Chris Evans. Chris Evans, right? Yeah, like. Those guys just seem like they've been there since 1980, and they're still gonna, they're gonna have the Frank Gore career. No, but seriously, Chase Brown is not only now in the pole position with an offense that we all think is a top 10 offense, maybe higher, but he's also an injury away, a Zach Moss injury away from being like RB9 in all the consensus rankings, right? Like this is a player I'm holding. I think if you are trying to trade away or cash out on him, it's going to come after the 80 yards and a touchdown in whatever week it happens. There's the cash out if you want it, but it's like cash. I don't know. I like Chase Brown. I'm not just like sell for any second. You're certainly never going to get a first-round pick for him in Dynasty, but there's probably a good veteran. Like, let's say this happens in like week 6, Theo, right? Why can't you get Mike Evans for him? We're one of the 30-year-old veterans, the Keenan Allen type. So if you want to cash out on a player like that, there was a window like that for like a Ty Chandler last year and Zamir White when he was scoring 18 fantasy points a game.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how you put it like that in terms of trade value. To me, a guy like Chase Brown, I would be looking to include in a 2-for-1 to scale up, because he's exactly the kind of value where people don't really know how to gauge him, but they think maybe Theo's underestimating his value. I can use this guy. Theo's actually sending me a starting running back in a plus offense on top of some wide receiver in order to pivot to a better wide receiver. I can kind of live with this deal. I think Chase Brown you're going to get more out of him in a 2-for-1 trade than you would trading him for rookie picks, because people aren't going to pay a first for him, and you're going to end up getting kind of what you got in rookie drafts for him. He's maybe a guy you could squeeze 2 seconds out of if he gets a starting job, but he's not the kind of guy that people are going to give a first for, Alan.
How about okay, fair enough. How about like using your strategy there, which I think is a good one, adding Chase Brown to a player that people are a little, there's polarization on, like say Adonai Mitchell. You just drafted him at the 204. You add Chase Brown, and could you get a distressed asset like a Jordan Addison right now, or Rashee Rice if a suspension comes down? Is that the type of the deal you'd be trying to make?
Yeah, I mean, I love getting distressed assets in Dynasty. And those are the kind of guys that I'm always looking to try to acquire. Jordan Addison's super interesting right now, because I think that the Dynasty marketplace, the redraft marketplace, best ball, everybody's just sort of like angry about this off the field incident. Guy did something stupid, of course, but in terms of where he stands with the team, nothing has changed. They have a lot of indecision as to who the wide receiver 3 is. They have a tight end who's going to start the year hurt in Hawkinson. And Alan, we wouldn't consider any of their other tight ends in our starting fantasy football lineup. It's not like they have an Isaiah Likely like situation behind him, or somebody that we're like excited to see get on the field. It's going to be like, what is it, a little Munt? I'm not sure who's going to start.
Well, they have they have Tunyon there who can catch passes. He's had like a big TD season, so he's probably a threat. Not someone you're ever going to start because right. But I'm just saying, like, you asked who's there, right? It's Tunyon's there, and then you said Munt. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and by the way, it's going to be Sam Darnold in all likelihood who starts. So, I mean, who do they have now? They have obviously Justin Jefferson's there. Let's say Addison gets suspended. Is there even a second option that you would even be?
No, I mean, I think I think that the way I would look to play it is, I think that the Aaron Jones with a little bit of Ty Chandler get more touches. So like, I think if I was really dumpster diving for week 1 flex, I like the idea of the 2 running backs as opposed to like a Brandon Powell or whatever wide receiver is going to be in the mix. It's just a bad situation. And you also think to make things easier on Darnold, it's going to be every first read is Justin Jefferson and a lot of potential dump offs to the running back. So Ty Chandler pretty good down the stretch. Aaron Jones, I think he'll get early season volume as well. So hard to kind of play that, but I think I would look to the low hanging fruit instead of trying to be a hero and picking up some wide receiver 3 off the waiver wire or something like that.
I could already see it now. Brandon Powell, week 1 waiver wire ad in redraft, right? Like 7 for 70 and a touchdown, because they're triple teaming Justin Jefferson and they have nobody else. Aaron Jones gets his, like you said, and Powell, I mean, he's already put up like, random fantasy numbers again. Yeah. And that could be somebody who was the wide receiver Brandon Lloyd, that came out of nowhere and had like top 5, top 2 season. You remember that? Like he was basically Brandon Powell, and then just exploded and had like a top 10 season.
Guys, this is Brandon Powell. I think will be this year's Tutu Atwell, where Tutu Atwell was getting signed off the waiver wire early and then just kind of fades into oblivion, but gave you a couple of usable weeks early on. That could be the show title. 10 people or so would listen to it if we said this year's Tutu Atwell. So let's keep this going. Where should dynasty managers who have not had their rookie draft Ricky Pearsall now that it looks like we're starting the year off hurt? Significant injury discount. And are you interested in throwing a couple of trade offers at Pearsall managers who are probably very disappointed about this news?
That $300 Dynasty League, I'm actually the commissioner of that one. That's the last rookie draft I have. It actually kicks off this Sunday, so we have not had it yet. You say Pearsall? I was saying Pearsall.
Pearsall. Listen,
Ricky P?
I call it like I see it. So I think it's like pear. We'll just call him Pearsall.
I'm gonna call Per. Oh, okay, Pearsall. Anyway. He was already discounted, right? Because on the Sonic Truth, when maybe like a month or two ago, we were talking about like if Brandon Ayuk is traded, and this is when Pearsall was healthy, we would say he would be going at like ahead of Xavier Worthy and those guys, or right around there, right? He'd be going in that mix for the 1.9 to 111 in our Superflex rookie drafts. So he was already discounted. You're getting him at the 2.4, 2.5 because he's a tuck away for next year type of player, and I think that's the perception. So how much lower can he go? I don't think the injury really affects him now. Maybe you see A.D. Mitchell go ahead of him. Certainly you might see Blake Corum jump him if somebody needs a running back. But I don't think, really the question is Polk or Leggett. Will they jump him? I don't think so. It's possible. So, he was already pretty much you were buying him at his absolute floor given his draft pedigree. So I can't see him going down.
Jermaine Burton or Ricky Pearsall in a rookie draft, if you're having it today?
I have too much respect for the draft capital to do that.
Let's talk about Jermaine Burton a little bit. It's a guy.
Well, how about you? How about you on that one?
I don't know. I think it's closer than we think. I think with Jermaine Burton, you're both betting on them to have a year 2 leap. With Pearsall, we have a first rounder, so it's a little bit more like the team is probably less likely to draft another first round wide receiver next year. Where with Burton, if Burton doesn't play well this year, maybe Cincinnati drafts a wide receiver in the first round next year, and Burton just sort of stays what he is, a wide receiver 3 with juice and speed. Jamar Chase in the wide receiver 1 role with like an immediate wide receiver 2 rookie, if Burton doesn't flash. But Burton was a guy that we talked about talent-wise being a second-round pick, late first-round type pick. There was just sort of the off-field stuff. Some teams were a little bit scared off, it seems. Cincinnati still takes him in the 3rd round. Pearsall now sort of loses a year 1, already a little bit older guy. And I'm not necessarily saying he's losing the entire year, but I think there's some speculating that this could be more of a redshirt season now that he's missing so much time early with Ayuk and Debo. Certainly there's a pathway where if Debo or Ayuk miss time, or George Kittle misses time for that matter, Alan, and they go more 3 wide heavy, that we see a second half of the year, Ricky Pearsall flashing, and we're right back to like happy about him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, just stick with Burton for a second too, because we're tying these guys together. Both Chase and T. Higgins have missed like 4 weeks at a time, so Burton might get his chance. And we always make like the joke, like who's this year's Tank Dell, who's this year's Puka Nacua. We're always trying to find like the unsuspecting guy that just like blows up. Maybe it is Burton, because Burton's somebody, like you said, that dropped because of the perception of the off-field stuff, that he was a, quote, first-round talent. So maybe he's in play as that guy that could ascend. And, I know it's a little bit like wishful thinking to say T. Higgins will be gone next year, but he doesn't need to be gone for this to actually happen. Look at Tank Dell now. He's still like, what, a 4th round pick in redraft? Then there's two major alpha wide receivers in Houston with him. So now that you bring up Burton versus Pearsall, you have me thinking. That's why we have these conversations on the podcast, because I came in with a certain point of view, and I think you just persuaded me to be a little bit more open on this.
Be open-minded, Alan, when it comes to Jermaine Burton. Let's talk about a deep sleeper here, and that's Deneric Prince. Deneric Prince is getting reps with the second team offense in KC. We obviously know that Isaiah Pacheco is locked in and the RB1 role. This is really one of the worst running back rooms in the NFL, if you want to kind of get real with it. CEH is a guy that we really would love to see someone take the job from and get excited about rostering a second running back. But Prince is interesting because this is a guy that had an incredible speed score. He had the highest speed score in the 2023 class. So that's just a weight-adjusted 40 time. And to put that in perspective, he has a better speed score than Marshawn Lloyd, than Tyrone Tracy, than a couple of these super athletic running backs in this class. He was and Jalen Wright. He has the exact same speed score as Jalen Wright. So we're talking about a plus athlete in year 2. there was a little buzz for him last year where people were drafting him in like the NFFC, FFPC, like 18th, 19th, 20th round, hoping that there was something there. Obviously, there wasn't. But are you interested in this sort of a unknown but athletic player as an RB2 in KC?
Yeah, what an indictment on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? I mean, this is terrible. They were trying Kadarius Toney, the Chiefs were, as running back. And look, it's Prince's undrafted guy. He's got the size at 6 foot and 215 pounds. I mean, and the Chiefs have revived running back careers before. I mean, Jerick McKinnon was like an afterthought after being like a hyped type of player. And you remember Damian Williams was like a nothing, like just kick to the curb dynasty asset, and then became a league winner, Theo, league winner. So yeah, I like Prince's chances. And by the way, Isaiah Pacheco, like, we're thinking like, oh, we think about underdog drafts and these, Pacheco, you get him in the 4th round. What a great value. Like, you get into some of these like home leagues, like he went in the 2nd round of one of our Rotowire drafts, a 14-teamer nonetheless, but still, like, Pacheco he could end up being the hero running back. So to your question about Prince, these running backs can't survive 17 games. It's like, it's nearly impossible to score 16, whatever it is, I mean, any reasonable injury projection has to have them missing 1.5 to 2.5 games. And Prince is, I don't know if he's draftable, but he'll certainly be atop the waiver wire week 9 when Isaiah Pacheco tweaks something.
Yeah, he's definitely one where if you have waivers running in your dynasty league, he's one where you want to just go ahead and check and make sure he's available, because you talk about Pacheco, but like Pacheco's had very fortunate injury history for a guy who runs his style. Just saying. Stranger things have happened, and we expect that offense to score a ton of points this year. Let's talk about Javonte Williams. This is an interesting one where there's speculation he could get cut. There's speculation Samaje Perine could get cut. One of these veterans seems to be out the door in Denver. Your interest level in like Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, or are you looking to kick the tires and you're like, you know what, I'm going to do what nobody else is doing and I'm going to buy a little bit of Javonte Williams?
What I want to harken back to a very brash and stupid statement that I made back on when we were doing the Player Profiler draft show, and I said when Estime got drafted, I said week 1 inactive, right? That's changing a little bit, right? He's and by the way, again, I think in fantasy football you need to be open to when things change. I think that's what the better players do. You remember not too long ago, maybe a month ago, there was a narrative in social media world about Javonte Williams could get cut. That's obviously not happening, right? I mean, Javonte Williams is there, but I think Estime is probably going to be in the mix for a handful of touches. And again, he's somebody you probably want on your roster. It's with Kamani Vidal on the Chargers, right? Like he's the one that gets pushed up to like the late 2nd round, and Estime sometimes goes in the 4th round. Yeah. That's just us like following ADP and what other drafts done. That could easily be swapped, right? I mean, so yes, I'm interested. I'm less interested in Javonte Williams than I've ever been. And if Estime is going to continue to be like a cheap or throw-in type of player, like that's someone that could end up being, useful for a window. I don't think he'll ever be like the quote starter. They have Jaleel McLaughlin there, who's like their modern day Phillip Lindsay. But yeah, no, I think one of these guys is going to have clear, 3 or 4 week windows where you want to start them in all your lineups.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I love the double tap of Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin. Let's talk a little bit about some guys that we think can rise. Got about 10 minutes left here, sure, Alan. So let's start talking about some of these guys. I put this player on, Keon Coleman, which has been a guy that's been completely beat up to the point where I don't think it's going to be difficult for him to rise. There was already reports yesterday that he looked very impressive among Bills wide receivers, and he's exactly the sort of guy that we see year in, year out get a bump when people actually see film highlights of him. Big time athlete. This was a hell of a basketball player, and he is going to look good in this sort of environment, especially when you put him next to guys where, no disrespect, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, one of those two guys has a high-end wide receiver 3 season in their range of outcomes. But Coleman's going to be the guy who makes the big plays, potentially a red zone weapon. Your thoughts on Keon Coleman rising this training camp?
I'm surprised he hasn't already, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm shocked at it. Like basically he was the first pick of the second round of the real NFL draft. So we're drawing that arbitrary line that he's a second round pick. Guy's a first round pick, right? Like he's a first round pick talent. The Bills probably understood what the market thought of him. Like he's a high upside, low floor, home runs. Like, no, they're like, we'll keep trading back in the real NFL draft to take this guy. And the thing that you just said that I think is the most important is that there's no one else on the team that looks like him. Right?
Yeah, like absolutely.
Yeah, Curtis Samuel is a nice player, but I mean, he's like Percy Harvin, sort of gimmicky player. He could do some nice things for you. And then you have Khalil Shakir, who's just, he's a good day 3 wide receiver. Is a hit. After that, it's like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Is that guy even going to make the team? Keon Coleman. I saw some coach speak about him that was saying like, oh, he's just going through the normal rookie ups and downs. Josh Allen, and then by the way, obviously Kincaid, we talked about him early, is we have to treat him like a wide receiver. That he's playing with the number 1 or number 2 best quarterback in the NFL. I mean, this is exactly what you want. And if you watch anything from Keon Coleman, I mean, I think it was a game against LSU. I'm pretty sure where he had like 3 or 4 touchdowns. That was the highlights on YouTube that I saw. I was like, man, it's like, that's the upside, right? Like, of course, there's going to be a lower floor for him, for someone like that. I mean, he's not have the high pedigree like Marvin Harrison Jr., but yeah, man, I think you're right. I think if we see a Keon Coleman play in preseason, it's like to the 6th round. Here we go.
You put Chris Godwin on this list as a guy that you think is going to rise, maybe even a full round. Yeah. Certainly in Dynasty, it's a little more of a short-term window, but your thoughts on Chris Godwin this season, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, just the case is that no one wants Chris Godwin because he's had 2 and 3 touchdowns the last couple of years. I mean, he's had the catches, had the yards. If he has a 7 or 8 touchdown season, he's back to paying the Bills as a 3rd round pick. So with all the talk that he could be in the slot more and they're actually going to be using him, and now it's his 2nd year with Baker Mayfield, I just think that he's I never draft Chris Godwin. It's like the most boring pick. I've always hated Chris Godwin, even when he was good. But I want to be in on Chris Godwin this year as a boring, good pick.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. Like those boring, understand what you have context-wise. A boring, good pick can be a guy that, like, it's the opposite of what you talked about with the Jameson Williams, where you might lack the spike weeks that maybe you had with Godwin in the past, but he could be a 14-point per game guy if it all goes right. And the last year he wasn't playing in the slot. His slot rate went from like being a 50% guy down to like a 25% guy. This year he'll be back to.
I want to ask you a question about that. So you hear that in a lot of podcasts, slot rate, right? I mean, I think I know what that means, but just for anyone listening, I'm sure. So the reason I started my podcast because I wanted to ask podcasters the questions that I had. So why is slot rate important for a wide receiver?
So I think that like we've seen 2 out of the last 3 wide receiver ones overall be heavily utilized in the slot. CeeDee Lamb lived in the slot last year. Cooper Kupp lived in the slot. Justin Jefferson played outside almost the whole time. He's a different kind of guy. But I think when these guys are getting moved inside to the slot, in theory, they should have advantageous matchups where they avoid some NFL defenses.
Mismatches, right?
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you the amount of teams who will have their top corner follow guys and shadow. Certain teams shadow more. There's other people who can give you that. I'm not.
But Godwin's not getting shadowed.
I won't even talk IDP, Alan. I'm not going to talk defensive stats. I want to clarify that for my audience. We're talking offensive side of the ball here on my podcast, but I think I want to get this guy easy looks, manufactured touches. That's why some of the hype, one of the reasons I'm so bullish on Jamar Chase this year is there's talk that he's going to be used more in the slot than he ever has been. He's like a Jefferson where 25% of the time he's in the slot max, some years less. So if we see Jamar Chase at like 35, 40% slot rate, wheels up, man, for a wide receiver 1 overall type season, in my opinion. So much easier to thread the needle there.
Yeah, I don't like to promote too hard, but I just put, the video I did for you guys in the player profiler draft kit. I did a Jamar Chase, why he should go 101 in all your drafts. So if you have the player profiler draft kit, just click on the ranking and the videos in there. It's something I truly believe in, that Jamar Chase should be the first overall pick, in because of the reason you said, which is it's new news, but yeah.
I just wrote a piece on The Athletic where it was Jamar Chase versus Justin Jefferson. I did that with like 2 other writers. That's easy. I took the Chase side. I was on the Chase side.
Of course, as you should be. I'm talking about Chase versus Christian McCaffrey at the 101.
Some of the commenters didn't like my selection, Alan. They were letting me have it a little bit.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's good, right? You're going
to media.
You're making them think, right? Yeah. No. By the way, congratulations. You're a published author in the fake New York Times.
It is
the failing New York Times.
No, it is absolutely the New York Times. Though if it's New York Times, it's the Athletics on the sports page. I haven't made it there yet, but it is very cool. My writing's on playerprofile.com, and you can check it on the Athletic as well.
I was obviously making a Trump joke with the failing New York Times.
I get it.
Okay. All right. You should never explain the joke. Never explain the joke.
Once you explain the joke is done.
It's bad.
And no comic explains the joke. So
totally right.
I put Deontay Johnson down. We saw Dave Canales talk about Deontay Johnson. We want to know where Deontay Johnson is at all times. They want to feature Deontay Johnson. And when it's a super simple argument here, it's not just what Deontay Johnson did in Pittsburgh, which is he had 3 seasons of heavily targeted football, but there was also what we saw from Adam Thielen last year. So 2 pathways. Bryce Young either gets better, or you see Bryce Young be the same, but hyper target one player like he did to start last year. Either scenario, Deontay Johnson is going to be a beneficiary. I drafted him in the 7th round of the FFPC Pros versus Joes earlier this week. I don't think 7th round Deontay Johnson will exist. And I think that I had one league where I got a 1st round pick in a single QB league for Deontay Johnson a couple weeks ago after a startup. And I was like, oh, I killed it. But that might actually be an annoying one this year if Deontay gets 150 targets and that team could have actually really used him. I still think I'll be happy I had the 1st, but you don't love to see the guy you trade away have a really strong season. I think it could be one of those for Deontay. Your thoughts, Alan?
Oh, yeah, no, Deontay, and here's the only thing I'll disagree with in there, and this is to your favor, by the way, is that Bryce Young doesn't even have to get better for Deontay to have a good season. And obviously,
Adam Thielen.
There it is. So Adam Thielen for the first month of the season was a top 5 wide receiver. If he just does that, right, I mean, that's good enough. And I think we all could assume that his confidence will be a little better. The expectations are lower. When your expectations are lower, you usually perform better. I mean, it's just human nature. And Deontay Johnson, I mean, if you go back to that 21 season, Theo, 107, I know this is the Steelers, but 107 receptions and 8 touchdowns. He doesn't even need the touchdowns. If he can get 107 receptions and 1,100 yards, like you said, that he'll be a 4th round value. And if he gets those, I mean, there was one year Deontay Johnson had 0 touchdowns, but he went back to like his career average of 5 last year. So if we can get him 80 catches, 950 yards and 7 touchdowns. I mean, that's an ADP smash. It's not a league winner, but it's part of a winning strategy for a team. Yeah,
I mean, getting a guy at wide receiver 38 and him finishing wide receiver 16, that sort of thing happens every single year.
You need
where
those
a guy, and we need those sort of IDP wins. It's not just the true league winners, but if you can turn your 7th round pick into a beneficial impactful play, then that's a big ADP win for you. Absolutely.
And in Dynasty, you could take Deontay Johnson if he is peaking and trade him for a distressed rookie asset that like a Pearsall.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk about one guy you put on the list, Alvin Kamara.
Obvious reasons. I mean, Kendre Miller is getting a lot of, there's a lot of negativity. Alvin Kamara has just always been a fantasy stud, even when he came back from a suspension last year. In our, it's almost impossible to move him in your dynasty league, except when he'll be scoring points. So there's a cash out coming for Alvin Kamara, or if you're a contender, we often talk about getting rid of guys. There's opportunity now because when Alvin Kamara starts scoring points, he's going to get expensive. So figure out a creative way to, would you trade Tank Dell for Alvin Kamara straight up if you need a workhorse running back and that's the final piece of your team? And Tank Dell is like your 4th or 5th wide receiver. I know it's an overpay.
No, okay. No, I'm not paying Tank. Not paying Tank Dell, but I think you get him for a lot less. Alan, people are scared to death about the age. It doesn't matter what he did last year. Like some dynasty managers will not be, especially with his profile as a pass catcher. And I'll say another thing is they don't have another intermediate pass catcher. Like we're hoping Chris Olave gets more manufactured looks around the line of scrimmage just to increase his target total. But besides Olave, there's not another high target earner. Kendre Miller also, Kendre Miller was the guy that was going to get 10 touches a game, potentially, even with a healthy Kamara. Seems like they really don't like Kendre Miller. Let's keep this going. Ramondre Stevenson, you put him down there. I love Mondre as a target everywhere. Antonio Gibson banged up right now. I think Ramondre is a dark horse RB1.
Ooh,
New England,
sexy.
And New England gets, let's say New England gets to like the 20th scoring offense. They were dead last year. I'm not asking them to even break into the top half, but just enough opportunities where Mondre could get some touchdowns. I think he's going to go 55 plus receptions again. We saw him have a near 70 reception season. Antonio Gibson already banged up a little bit. And then you talk about the wide receiver room being so young. I think Mondre is going to get RB1 usage. And all we've got to see is him, deliver with mid-level RB2 numbers. I think it's absolutely in the wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, the contract that he got, which was probably an overpay, but he got it, right? Like, so,
yeah.
I mean, he's still pretty inexpensive. He's gettable in a trade. Like, again, we often talk about what could you sell him for? What could you buy him for? Right. So if Jaylen Warren's a popular name, would you trade Jaylen Warren away to get Ramondre? I mean, I think that those are and again, it's like, what are you running back for running back? But Jamison Williams, would you trade away Jamison Williams on the hype right now to get Ramondre? Now, again, you might say like,
that's one I absolutely would do.
Right. There you go.
I'm absolutely doing that one.
Whereas before, Jamison Williams wouldn't even get you to the table with anything. So this is what we're talking about. It's not always about selling these guys on peak. It's buying them. Ramondre Stevenson, you just said sneaky top 12. Wow, that blows my mind. I was thinking like he's going to be an every week starter because of that contract, not just for this year, but for next year too. So, yeah, he's a riser.
Well, next year also, that's the window where if Drake May, it starts becoming a better player of the second half of the season, gets his feet wet, we might be a little bit more excited about this offense heading into next season. And Mondre would still be one of the focal points based on the contract. So definitely an interesting player in Dynasty redraft best ball. Alan, close us out with Rashee Rice.
Rashee Rice doesn't look like he's going to be suspended this year. So if there's anyone, I mean, that's what we're seeing. And that's not uncommon in the NFL, right? Like even Alvin Kamara took a couple seasons. Zeke Elliott, it took a couple seasons. So that season immediately following the infraction or the discretion or whatever it is, sometimes that they play the whole year. So there is knucklehead risk with Rashee Rice. It's been a couple instances in the offseason. But if he's still being traded for, I mean, look, if they came out today, Theo, and said he is not being suspended this year, like with definite, that means obviously that his price would go back to wherever it was, I mean, Brian Thomas, 111, that type of price. So there's still a window if you believe in Rashee Rice to get him. We talked about a couple of the running backs that you may not believe in, Najee Harris, plus a little something right there. So yeah, I think Rashee Rice, from where he is today, when you're listening to this podcast versus where he's going to be in week 2, if there's no suspension, that just puts him up another tier.
And right around rookie draft season in the FFPC, I traded a mid-second rounder and a 2025 third. Got myself some Rashee Rice. That might be an absolute steal right there, Alan.
Yeah, that is one. And again, people say, oh, I want to be in your league. These things happen if you actually go out there and try to grind these trades. I wish I did that more in my 40-plus league. So kudos. I'm standing ovation for that trade.
Alan, what do you have coming out?
The only thing I want to promote today, Theo, is if you have SiriusXM Radio, we are back on. I'll be on every Sunday from 1 to 3 leading up to the season, and then we'll see what happens with the regular season. The last few years we've been on in the morning. If you're listening to this podcast in the late July, we'll be on Saturday and Sunday. So SiriusXM Radio, Channel 87, the Fantasy Sports Channel, every Sunday 1 to 3.
Love it. Highly recommend anything Alan does.
Woo.
Big hat tip to everything you guys are doing at Rotowire. Some really sharp guys over there. I'm going to be on with Jim Coventry, I think, middle of August.
Yep.
He's putting something together, so I got to get back to Jim. Stick with us here at Dynasty Life. We're going to help you.
I got one more thing for you. One more thing.
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to tell you, Theo, I obviously, I admire all the work you do, but I appreciate your friendship and, the little behind the curtain here, I call Theo. I bother him all the time on the telephone. Yeah, you remember that thing they call the telephone? We don't text.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, no, I appreciate your friendship. I wanted to say that publicly.
No, I appreciate yours as well, Alan. And Alan, I'm trying to get you out of here. I know you're the one with the tight deadline today.
Yes.
Stick with us here at Dynasty Life. We got you covered. We're going to help you crush your Dynasty leagues this season.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.